Hi everyone, Jessica here from Paper Ink Stamp and welcome back to my channel. So today's card we're going to be using some of these new Creative Expressions products I bought, and then we're going to be doing this colour throwdown challenge as well. So I've got a Distress Oxide in Brush Corduroy, I've got some Misty Grey cardstock and some cream. We've got our embossing folder and then we have our leaf die as well. So to begin with, I'm going to create a bit of a background using this brushed corduroy Distress Oxide, and then we're going to put this through our embossing folder. So I've got a piece of watercolour cardstock here. This is by Sentimentally Yours, and I'm just going to cut this down to the size that I want to begin with. So I'm going to make a 5x7 card, but I wanted to have quite a big border because the leaves die I'm using is very small. I wanted to create kind of more area, so I've cut this down. I think I cut it to 4.5 by 6.5, I think it was, and I'm just going to do a little bit of ink smooshing here with this colour. This is darker than I thought it was going to be. However, it's nice to kind of use this colour. I've never used it before, and this is a really great colour palette actually for a colour combination that I wouldn't, again, normally kind of reach for these colours. But I'm just sort of drying this off in between. The other thing I'm doing as well, before I start my ink smooshing, I will just spritz my cardstock with the water. That helps to kind of get that initial base colour moving around. You can see that some areas maybe the water didn't quite hit it, and it's got more of a harsher line between where the colour is and where the cardstock is. And then in the areas where you can see that it's kind of fading really beautifully, that is where then I had that initial bit of water. But I'm just coming in with my water spritzer, just trying to fill in some of those areas a little bit more, because I didn't want to have those kind of harsh lines there. But I'm just kind of going back and forth, got my heat tool here, just drying certain areas, bringing in a little bit more of that colour, a little bit more water, and again just kind of repeating that process a little bit. I'm then going to clean up my mat. I'm going to take a paper towel and try to lift any excess colour that we've got sat here on the top until it's nice and dried out fully. I am then just going to spritz a little bit of water. I'm doing this off camera because I don't have a splat box or anything underneath this, but I'm just spritzing it and using that paper towel to pick up that colour just to give it a little bit more kind of texture. When this is all then really nice and dry, we can run this through the embossing folder. This was the new one I got from Creative Expressions. This is the square zigzag or zigzag square. I wasn't sure to begin with whether this would actually fit this piece of cardstock, but I kind of forgot how big it was. But I'm so happy that this is a bigger size because I'm actually loving this embossing folder. I think it's so beautiful. And kind of combining that then with that ink smooshing, I think gives a really great result. You could almost turn this into kind of old paper. I know there is another Distress Oxide colour. This is slightly darker, but yeah, I just think it looks really great together. You could also emboss first and then do some ink smooshing. That will give you some sort of different look to this kind of background, because you're going to have that colour kind of pool around your design if that's something that you want to go for. So I'm going to work on this panel here, so you can see how much smaller this die is, and I want to make sure that I kind of get it centered nicely, because this is going to cut the design from the cardstock. It's not going to completely cut anything out. I need to cut down my panel to begin with. So originally, and what I'm doing here, I'm giving myself quite a big, I think it was a half an inch each side, a quarter of an inch, sorry, each side of this panel. I do end up trimming this down, so it's only going to be slightly less than that. It's going to have a much thinner border. And this is just so I can make sure that I get my panel in the exact place I need it to go, and I can have then an even border around the outside. So I find it easier to cut my panel to size first and then die cut from it. So I ran that through the die cutting machine. It did go through, and you can see that on the back here, but I decided to run it through again. I just popped in here a piece of paper for an extra shim. So when I've got more detailed dies, I kind of forget to do it initially, but if I do have a more detailed die, I like to put an extra shim in there just to make things easier when you're trying to kind of get all of those smaller pieces out of your design here. So I'm going to spend, it just takes me a couple minutes just to get all of these pieces out of here. I'm going to bring it back on camera in a second so you can kind of see the design, but I'm just kind of emptying all these little bits into my recycling bin, just so I don't make too much mess on my desk. But this is a really great die. You'd be able to use this as a sort of topper if you wanted to do kind of a shaker card. You could do that behind it, because you could make that frame around it slightly bigger to be able to take the shaker foam that you might have, or the 3D foam and things like that. You could add glitter in between this. You could just paper piece these pieces back in again. It's a really great dye for loads of different techniques because you do have those kind of spaces, and it's quite an interesting design, and I think it works nicely actually with the color palette again that this color throwdown challenge is using. I think it just works really well for it. So you can see that I'm just coming to the end of poking all of these bits out. Again, if you have maybe a slightly thicker shim in here, it might just go, everything might come out that little bit easier. So just experiment with the machine that you've got to see exactly the combination that you need. So I'm going to start kind of bringing this together again. I want to see how this is going to look, and you can see with that thicker border, that's like I said, the 1/4 of an inch. I did then trim this down. I think I took about 1/8 of an inch off each side, and it made it a lot smaller, but it gave it that nicer border. So I'm just going to trim that down. I'm going to add this actually onto my panel flat. So afterwards, I did consider then having turned this into a shaker element, but to be honest, I don't really have any sequins that would have gone, or any shaker elements that would have gone with this color scheme. So I just decided to take some of the twine. Again, this was from my last haul. And I'm just going to glue basically everything flat to each other. And then I'm going to wrap some of this twine around it and kind of tie it in a bow just to, again, tie in some more of that colour. And again, I think the twine and this natural kind of twine works really nicely with it. So for this, rather than kind of messing around too much with adding glue, behind those leaves and things, I've basically just added my glue to the frame of this. So it does kind of lift forward a little bit because of that embossing, but again, I think it just adds something a little bit of extra element onto this rather than having everything kind of, dead flat. So I'm going to twist my twine around this 3 times. I just popped a little bit of washi tape on the back of that just to hold that first little bit in place. And then I'm going to tie a bow on the front of this. So I am absolutely rubbish at tying bows. Nothing professional about my bow tying abilities, but I'm using my reverse tweezers. This is something that Amy R does. I've seen on her channel. She just uses her reverse tweezers to hold that first little bit in place, and then she can kind of tie the rest of it. She's very good at doing her bows. Like I said, I'm absolutely rubbish with mine. I blame it on the fact that I'm left-handed, but I can just never kind of get it to sit right, to be honest. And so this is kind of more of a vertical bow by the time this card finishes up. But yeah, I still like just the kind of fibers and stuff that it adds to this card. So once I've got that sorted, I can just trim off those tails a little bit, and then I'm going to add some of my foam tape onto the back of this. And this is then going to help, especially with that embossed detail, it's going to help stick onto the card. Then it's going to help with any warping from our background, so using all of that water on it, using the heat gun on it as well. I do find that adding foam tape to a panel like this is kind of one of the better ways to help get it to flatten out. If you do want to get it nice and flat, you could put it under something heavy. You could run it through your die cutting machine without, literally just through the plates itself and get it to flatten that way. But because I'd used the embossing folder, I didn't want to do any of that kind of after the fact and sort of take away any of that dimension and depth from my embossing folder. So I'm going to take off all of the pieces from the back, and then I can pop this onto my 5x7 card base. So I was thinking then about just adding the twine around that grey panel, but I'm so glad that I added it around the whole thing. I just think it looks a lot nicer. So the next thing I'm going to do is our sentiment. So I'm going to use, again, another new product. This is one of the mini expressions. This is the word sending. It's lovely and script. I die cut this from some black, and it is a very fine, very small kind of die. There is not a lot of chunky pieces, and I did wonder how I was going to attach it to the card. I was thinking about stacking it to make it a little bit more thicker, so it had a little bit more strength to it, but this isn't the kind of die cut that I'd want to be adding a lot of glue to the back of, because it would I would be ending up in a little bit of a mess with it. So I decided to take out a new product. So I bought this not in my last haul, but the previous one to that, the very first one for March, and this is the Creative Craft products, and this is the Adhesive foam sheets. They come in black and white, so I'm using the black one here. It seemed to be a little counterproductive because I didn't realise that my black cardstock was a white core cardstock, so it wasn't black all the way through. So on the finished card you can see that white outline around it. It's not horrendous. I wouldn't choose to use this kind of cardstock, to be honest. I try to stay away from any white core cardstock, but it kind of defeated the purpose then of using the black foam with this, because the idea is this is a nice thick piece of foam adhesive. You can die cut this and it die cuts really easily. I'm having a little bit of trouble here sort of getting it out again because the word die itself is very delicate. But it means then that you can have that black adhesive behind your black word, or die cut, whatever it is. So you can choose to have black or white. So obviously I'm going black on black because then it's just going to look a bit more polished, but again, because then you've got that white core around the edge, it kind of, to me, defeats the purpose a little bit of it. But what I'm going to do on this foam adhesive sheet, you do have a release paper, the front and back, so it is sticky both sides. The idea is then you can die cut it, you add your kind of paper die cut on top of it, and then you take the backing off to stick it to your project. So I've taken the top layer off this and I'm just then sticking on this paper die cut that I've got, so where I've die cut it from the black cardstock. I'm just adding this over the top. Again, this took me a good probably 5 minutes to get this really nice and lined up, again because it's such a thin word here, so you can see how it's kind of lost its shape. I'm trying to put it back into shape a little bit. But I would much rather do something like this and spend a little bit of time adding this on top than having to try and add glue to this or trying to stack multiples of these together. This is definitely, for me, the easier option out of all the different ways you could do it. But once I took the release paper off the back, I just kind of lined it up then with that frame. So I've put it underneath our twine. I was, again, originally planning to pop it onto our, more in the middle of our panel, but I decided just to pop it underneath. And then I'm going to take my Paper Ink Stamp Ultimate Sentiment Builder stamp set and I'm going to create a bigger sentiment underneath. So I'm stamping this onto some cream cardstock. This is the Craft Perfect Cream because again I thought this would go nicer with this color scheme. So it's gonna read Send in Happy Thoughts. So what I decided to do, because I wanted to build that sentiment, is to stamp happy is one sentiment. Then I have another stamp which is always in our thoughts. So I just took that sentiment. I'm literally just stamping, I'm just inking up the thoughts portion of it, and it's going to read happy thoughts. So then I'm going to stamp them next to each other. Originally I was going to do them as two separate ones. That's why I'd already stamped that happy. But I decided then just to make one long strip. So it's just going to be one strip and it's going to read then happy thoughts. So with this stamp set, you can mix and match within the stamp set itself. You can do these as a separate words and just cut them into strips, or you can do this and kind of build it onto one strip. There's so much that you can do with this stamp set, and I will pop a link in the description box down below to my Etsy shop where I am selling this particular stamp set and then my ultimate big words as well. So I'm just going to cut this down into a strip, like I said, and then this is going to go just right underneath. It's actually the perfect size to fit in between the S and the G. So it's going to go underneath our sending. And this is why I decided to pick this die up, because I thought it's going to work nicely with my stamp set as well, just to add a few extra words kind of into your possibilities. So I'm just going to take a strip of foam and pop that onto the back of this strip, and like I said, it's going to nestle in there really nicely. It's like the perfect length to fit in there with that sentiment. So I'm going to add, just to finish this off, some Nuvo drops. I decided to go with the black just to kind of emphasize that black a little bit, because our color palette on the color throwdown challenge, that did have black on it as well. I'm going to take some black Nuvo drops and I'm just going to add 5. So I've got 3 is going to be around the sentiment, and then I'm going to add 2 just sort of further up, just to add a little bit more interest up there. And that is then going to be our card finished for today. So this is using some new products that I purchased. If you haven't checked out my haul video, definitely go and check that out, and check out the prices of some of these products. They were incredible. And then also participating in this week's colour throwdown challenge as well. So you can head over to Instagram and search for that hashtag. So colour spelled C-O-L-O-R, so the American way of spelling it. And then you can see every week they put up a new colour combination, and then you can post pictures, tag them in it, and you know, it can go onto their feed. But for now, that's going to be it for today's video. If you did like this card, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do so you don't miss out on any future videos. That's it for today. Thanks very much for watching, and happy crafting.